Shall we take questions from the floor now?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Hi everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I think someone texted me that there are written questions, and there are also two microphone stands there in the middle, up there on the stairs. If you want to approach it, you can, and you can introduce yourself if you want to, and you can contextualize your question, but don't give us. And just ask the question, you can also share. Can they also share an anecdote if they want to, or a story?
Anything is okay.
Okay. Okay. Anyone would like to ask a question? That's my husband, by the way.
Thank you, Sister Zarina, and
thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very enlightening, and I always like this kind of talks. And of course, individually we have there are various levels of appreciation depending on exposure and age and all that. And some people may tend towards more of this kind of approach of tasawwuf and see the beauty of Islam through tasawwuf. But there are others who may be less so. And I would like to ask, in terms of your observation to the youth, and I'm talking as a role as a teacher, also as a mother. How do you bring other people to see and to appreciate the way you look at Islam? And of course, I think tasawwuf to you is a very important thing to bring this influence to other people. And as a writer, I think you are gifted to do that. But how do you think mothers and ordinary people to appreciate Islam from the view of tasawwuf, and especially the young people who may be more technical and mechanical and are so distracted with a lot of things? Thank you.
Well, as a parent, I can't pretend to be, to know all the answers. I'm like you. I have, your children. Once they're grown up, they're on their own. You can't, you've done the best you can, and they either behave themselves or not, and they either are they behave intelligently or they don't, or there are lots of things that are out of your control. But what I would say is try to make Islam a beautiful experience, and not to make it so restrictive that as soon as they become liberated from you as parents, that they want to try the other side. They go to the dark side of the spectrum and experience everything, because this is the problem nowadays. The dominant society is a permissive society that allows everything, and if you go like America, where that's almost a religion, is permissiveness, and this is a really big challenge. I would say introduce them to the beauty of Islam, and I think we've lost the sense of storytelling, to bring children up with stories about Islam. And this is what I've tried to sort of reintroduce with the books that I've written, is to reintroduce this idea of stories of awliya, and then stories of people who are struggling, and so on and so forth. And also, if you're in the proximity of people of great blessing, let's say we would call them the awliya or the salihin, to let your children be associated with these people, because it's this beautiful quality they have. That's no guarantee. And as a teacher, I have enormous respect for teachers, and I tried teaching at one time in my life. I tried it out because my parents were both teachers, and I absolutely hated it. I realized that I just wasn't a good teacher because I don't care if anyone knows anything, and that's a big liability for a teacher. Oh, you don't want to do your homework? No, fine, I don't care. So I'm not really the best person to it's really hard. We're all struggling together, and we're facing these things. I think there's no guarantee, but I think if you're sincere and you bring your children into something that makes them love it, and try not to be too restrictive, because I think this is what you want your children to follow the path, but you need to realize that they're in this world which is, dominated by something else. So give them a bit of it, let them experience something, and try to give them a moral foundation. And my friend Gray Henry Blakemore, who's the publisher of Fons Vitae, she's embarked on this enormous project of translating Al-Ghazali's works into children's for children, and I think that's a noble undertaking, and more of that is to associate children with a moral foundation, with ethics, those kinds of things from a very early age.
I think I've seen the book. It's really beautiful, a collection of it. Yeah, exactly.
She's also Aisha. She's in this book as well. Her story.
Okay, thank you so much for the question and for the answer. Any other lady? Brother Ashraf? Was it Brother Ashraf? Was it? Yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm also from the U.S. and I've been living in the Muslim world for maybe past 12 years, 10 years actually. And my question has to do with, we know with living in a Muslim country versus living in a non-Muslim country. I mean, obviously you have moved to Turkey and you lived in the Muslim world. And we also know kind of the importance of company when it comes to Tauba and the man who killed 99 people and then killed 100, and he was told to go to another place with good people. Right. So what's your advice? And of course, we know here in Malaysia, there are, of course, a lot of people who go to the West to study as well as to live. So what are your thoughts about living in a Muslim country versus living in a non-Muslim country, and Tauba, basically? Barakallahu feekum.
That's a tough question to give you an answer to. You and I both know the answer in a way. I mean, I haven't lived in the U.S. where I'm from for over 40 years, so I've been away from. I go back and visit, and my children are there. The U.S. in particular is a really difficult place for Muslims. It's very, very difficult because of the polarization, because of the bigotry. The U.S. is a deeply, deeply racist country and has been, forever. And so it's more difficult to live in a place like that, but it's not impossible. When we started back in the 70s, nobody knew anything about Islam. Islam was an unknown, but there was no prejudice against Islam except it being an unknown thing. Now, of course, people know a lot. Well, they think they know a lot about Islam, and it's all bad generally. And Muslims are characterized as either villains or victims, one or the other. And it's a very difficult time for Muslims in the U.S. But having said that, before there were no communities, there was no knowledge. The only communities that you had in the U.S., and I think Brother Ashraf can attest to this. The only communities in the U.S. Were immigrant communities, and many of them were trying to assimilate. The parents were assimilating, the kids were trying to assimilate. They would have, if they were religious at all, they'd have Sunday school, and that's it. And then the rest of the time they were plunged into this American system, which sort of demands that you assimilate. In Britain, it's a little better, although you wouldn't know that from talking to Muslim communities. They think it's terrible, but it is a bit better. Mainly because the British system is a class system, And you can live in Britain as long as you don't try to join their clubs. You can be part of British society, but you're over there. So Muslims are kind of ghettoized in certain cities, and it's fine. People just don't try to intersect with the mainstream population. Although now it's getting worse because of Brexit and everything is moving to the right. In the Muslim world, it really depends on where you are. The problem, a lot of people like myself, we went to the Gulf countries because at that time in 1980 it was booming, and when I came to the Gulf in that period and came to Saudi Arabia, people were fascinated with the West. That was like, tell us about the West, because they didn't know anything. You'd be surprised. I mean, people who had a lot of money at that time, who had the ability to travel, most of them didn't really travel beyond Beirut and Cairo. They would go, they would stay within the Arab world because that was what they were comfortable with. And then when the boom happened in about 1975, 76, and all this money flooded into these countries, suddenly people were in Europe and, they were going crazy. They were, it was just, and I was living in London at that time, and it really was a very crazy time. People would come for the first time. They'd never been to the UK, and suddenly everything was open and free and permissive, and they went crazy. But gradually, things have changed in the Arab world, and there's a deep, deep resentment of foreigners in the Arab world now. And I'm not talking about here, but certainly in the Gulf countries, it's a very complicated situation now. So it's much harder. And the other problem is that people who immigrated to places like Saudi Arabia or UAE or Bahrain, the Gulf countries, they can never, ever, ever, ever become part of the society. They're never allowed to be citizens or even permanent residents. So you can't really put down roots in these places. They'll kick you out as fast as they'll look at you. You can't. So there's no stability. So being an expatriate is problematic. But on the other hand, you're surrounded by Muslims. Now, I have to be perfectly honest. I settled in Saudi Arabia because my first wife was Saudi, and I wanted my children to grow up as Muslims and not feel like they were Martians, in the U.S. or, something really weird. And it didn't work out really that way. I mean, all my children loathe Saudi Arabia. They hate the place. They went to school there, and they absolutely hate it because they experienced a lot of, ignorance and backwardness, and, and they were never accepted as, so I think the most important thing is proximity to people of deep faith, wherever it is, and keeping good company. And you can do that wherever you are. You can do it in the U.S., you can do it in any country, and then put down roots. If you're going to be in a place, put down roots, live there, become part of the place. I don't think that I would never recommend anyone to go to the Gulf, to any Gulf country, because it's temporary. You can't put down roots. And the young people make them what I think is a kind of mistake, and they think, oh, well, I'll get out. Well, it doesn't. It's like renting a flat. You rent a flat and say, well, if I don't like it, I'm going to get out. And then you get stuck there for like year after year after year because you're already in it, and moving is a big pain and so on. And the same thing is true, in these countries. So I don't know if that's Ashraf. Does that answer your question, or you don't think it's very good?
He thinks it's very good.
I don't know if it's any good or not. Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm going to ask him one more. Okay. Basically, on page 285, you had said this. This was the beginning of part 6. Sorry, I think I put My microphone's close to my mouth. In my experience, and this is a quote on this section, part 6. In my experience, in Sidi Harun's experience, an insane person, and I have met a few, is someone who believes that the entire universe and everything in it is conspiring against him. The sane person, on the other hand, is the one who believes that the entire universe and everything in it is conspiring for him. I, unfortunately, am a denizen of the latter category.
Yeah, fortunately, not unfortunately.
Oh, I fortunately am denizen of the latter category. I know I've asked you this before, but I wanted them to benefit from what were you trying to say?
Do you understand what was read? I mean, okay, fair enough. What I wrote was that, in my experience, crazy people, and I have met quite a few crazy people in my life, and I mean seriously mentally ill people. They tend, one of the characteristics of people like that is that they think that the entire universe is against them. Everything, and it's quite disturbing when you meet people like that. But on the contrary, a sane person, really, sanity is when you realize that the entire universe is conspiring for you. And this is a recognition of Allah's generosity and mercy, and even if you don't put it in theological terms, in terms of God or not, to realize that the universe is benign, that God wants you, Allah wants you to succeed, Allah wants you to recognize Him, and gives you all kinds of opportunities, endless opportunities. And one of the principles on the path, one of the first things that you have to correct is this idea of risk, of provision. Allah is the provider. You're not the provider. You're not the provider. Allah is the provider. You run around doing whatever you have to do, but it's Allah that is the provider. And when you can relax and step back and realize that, life becomes easier. And the people of the path who recognize this, that the generosity and mercy and the beautiful qualities of Allah, the compassion of Allah, you realize that everything is there to help you along the way. And if you just set off, people don't take Islam seriously. Allah says, "Remember me, and I will remember you. Remember me, and I will." Either that's true or it's not true. So when you are remembering Allah, that means He is remembering you. You are being remembered by the Creator. In a Hadith Qudsi, Allah says, "The whole universe cannot contain me, but the heart of the believer can contain me." Think about that. Look at the universe. I mean, try to even conceive of the universe. And the heart can hold all of that. The heart. Now, either that's true or it's not true. And it goes on and on like that. And when you realize how many dispensations we have to achieve, to achieve what we want in life, it's phenomenal. It's incredible. Every minute one of the great awliya has a dhikr, and he said that in every breath that every one of Allah's breaths, there are 100,000 intimate openings in every breath Allah takes. Now, we don't know what that means even. That's beyond. But this notion of the infinite mercy, in infinite kind, lutf and hifz, being protected, being that Allah is subtle and kind and compassionate and generous. These things, that's sanity. That's sanity. Insanity is thinking everything is, everything's against me. They're my enemy. Nobody's your enemy. It's and if you realize that, that's sanity. That's the beginning of sanity. And what you do if thoughts pour into your mind, and what you do when you start having doubts and all of this is put them out of the mind. Put them, because the what's in the heart and what's in the mind is real until it's not real. In other words, it's your inward life is as real as your outward life. And the problem is that we're all stuck on the outside of ourselves, But once you start turning inward, you realize that you have a whole universe inside yourself. And people who have dream lives know this. Suddenly something happens in a dream. One of the Sufis said, I dreamt last night that I was a butterfly, and now I'm wondering, now that I woke up, whether I was a butterfly dreaming, whether I'm a butterfly dreaming that I'm a person, or that I was a person dreaming that I was a butterfly. I mean, we have deep dimensions, and it's full of mercy and love and compassion and so on. This is sanity. This is real sanity.
Wow, that's really amazing. It's so profound. It's mind-blowing. I've got 3 more other questions, and I'm not going to ask any of my own. Anyone, please, from the audience? Yes, sister, please.
I understand that each of us have our own journey in finding God. Can you hear me?
Each of us we have our own journey in finding God. Okay.
So, okay, is it better now? Okay, come. So, my question is that, would you mind sharing how for us to make it a consistent practice in order to keep coming back to God? Because as you said, the faith will come up and down. And then sometimes when it's down, it's really hard to go up again. It's like you don't feel like you're worthy to come back. Those kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The consistency is the hardest part is to be consistent. Would you mind sharing any of your journey?
I'm like the most inconsistent person you could possibly meet. I mean, I'm really inconsistent. I'm up and down, all that. I think that the way to live is it's almost like surfing or rolling with the waves. You're up and down. You never give up. You're always worthy. Don't give up. So you make a mistake. That's part of what I've tried to get across in this book, is this idea that you're in constant tauba. You make a mistake, you turn away from it. You make a mistake again, you keep turning away from it. It's a constant process, and you pick yourself up and start again. Someone came to me and said, "Oh, I did this and that." I said, "Well, stop, and get on with it. And if you make the mistake again, it doesn't mean you're not worthy. Of course you're worthy. Allah wants you to succeed." And sometimes, Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari said, sometimes a sin is the cause for attaining knowledge, spiritual knowledge. Sometimes a sin triggers something in you. It's not that you go around saying, "Well, if in that case, then I guess all I'm going to do is sin." It isn't like that. But it's that the heart is very, very dynamic, and you have to overcome there are 2 principles. I mentioned this already. It's the love of the world and the attachment to the ego. Those are the 2 things that stop you and put you in, make you go down. And part of that process is to recognize the ego. First of all, to recognize the worthlessness of the world. I mean, the world is passing. It's all going to be gone. Trust me. It will you will lose all of the world at some point or another. You'll lose your youth, you'll lose your wealth, you'll lose everything eventually. And that's not something to feel depressed about. It's something to become detached from, because it's the reality. And the ego will make you do things you don't want to do, so you're going to fall. But the part of the process is to recognize what the ego is about, to see the form of the ego. You follow? And how can you do that? You do it through doing the wrong thing, to going down, falling, then pick yourself up. You say, "Oh, I get it. This is what I'm this is," because the ego is a tricky thing. It's very tricky, and it gets subtler and subtler. In other words, it's not, that you're doing something, you're doing like a big sin or something. It's just sometimes I'll give you an example. Who has heard of Sheikh Sharawi? Sheikh Metwali Sharawi was a great orator and a scholar, and he was the first media figure in the Arab world. He was a religious media figure. He was hugely popular, and he was a rock star in that period. And I had some friends who were ardent followers of Sheikh Sharawi, and they knew him because they were wealthy and they could circulate and so on. And they went to visit him at the house of his sheikh, who was an Algerian sheikh, Sheikh Mohammed bin Qaid. And he was on his hands and knees, and he was an old man by then. He was on his hands and knees scrubbing the floor of the sheikh's house. And they said, "Ya Maulana, why are you doing the work of a housemaid?" He said, "Because I was giving a talk, and I said something, and I thought to myself, look how clever you are. Look, that's brilliant what you said. And I have to make Tauba from that." So he was on his hands and knees scrubbing the floor, and not in front of people, not to show off. They just caught him doing that. And that's the process, is finding these little tiny things that, in the nafs, that, that make you, that reinforce the ego. One of the shuyukh told me, he said that when you're in sajda, you should be zero. He said, you have to be zero, meaning you're not there anymore. He said, otherwise the ego is there. And so that's the thing. And doing a wrong thing lets you see the form of the ego. This is the ego. So in the context of dhikr Allah, this whole process is good. So it's all good. Don't ever give up. Don't be discouraged. That's part of the thing.
Alhamdulillah, that's wonderful. We have 10 minutes more before we need to start the book signing. Brother Amran, did you have a question?
You only have 10 minutes more.
Do you want to ask a question?
Yes.
Do you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to make it a short question. 2 questions, actually.
It's going to take 10 minutes to do the question?
That's why I asked. Okay, my first question is this. You did mention this was my question. Actually, started to get its form in the earlier talk. You talked about Tauba being a process,
right?
So, as a process, probably there's a system that needs to be put in place. What's the role of the community? There's something that I was just thinking about. Like, what's the best? Like, some of us are just struggling alone. Do we need to have a community, or should the community be, instead of being very judgmental, be more open? That look, everybody is going through a struggle. I don't know, but it's just some question that I have with respect to community. What's the role of the community with respect to, in terms of people going through this process of transformation?
Right.
Since a process needs something to support it. And then the second question I have is that since you've met lots of different people from different walks of life, are there similarities in the process that they've gone through?
So I didn't understand the last part. Are there similarities in what?
Similarities are ingredients the same. Like can we pinpoint? Okay, even though they've each gone through their own separate ways, but there are similarities where we can pinpoint. Okay, this is the common thread that each one has gone through this kind of common thread towards their process of transformation.
Yeah, up to a point. Let me answer the first question. There's a confusion. People talk a lot about community all the time. On a spiritual path, Islam, first of all, there's no community. There's no such thing as a community in Islam per se. There is the ummah, which is all the Muslims, and then there's suhbah, there's companionship. And I think that let's focus on companionship. Thinking that the community is going to help solve your problems is not going to work, because the community now, the Muslim community, is so diverse, so conflicted, so kind of confused that you're not going to get help and support from the community. And I'm not even sure what you mean by that. You mean a state, a Muslim state? I mean, this is one of the problems. Muslim states, they all have different things. Some don't follow anything to do with Islam, and others are fascistic, and so on and so forth. But in terms of purification of the heart, suhbah or companionship is very, very important, and you should seek out companions who are on the same track as you are. In other words, find companionship. This is a very, very important thing. I'll give you an example. I was contacted by someone who's living in Vietnam, okay? And he's very remote, and he was apparently very messed up. I don't know. But he was doing thousands and thousands of repetitions of dhikr. And it just sounded fishy to me. And he said he wanted Idhan to do something and that. So I contacted a sheikh that I'm very close to. And I said, look, I don't know how to deal with this guy. And he said, okay, let me check him out, inwardly. He went away, and I had to wait for a couple of weeks. He came back. He said, okay, he has had a bad beginning. And he gave him a dhikr that's takes 1 minute to do or 2 minutes to do. He said he must do this. But he also qualified his statement by saying, but if he does not have good companionship, it's not going to work. And the guy's in Vietnam. He's remote, he's cut off from everything, and I think he's messed up his eye. But I thought that was very interesting. Companionship is key. It's a very, very important part of the path. But it doesn't mean that you have this community, per se. And I think that people make a mistake in thinking about, and a lot of Muslims, I don't know about here, but they say, oh, well, let's go off and start our own community. Well, that's what's called an intentional community. And this is what the Sufi taqiyas were like. They were artificially organized communities they were all on and there are a number of prerequisites for setting up an intentional community. And it's a big job, and you need to also, how are you going to support the community? How is it going to work? But within that, within a normal society, seeking out companionship. We have, look at all you here. You already could be companions. You could help each other and advise each other. And I think this is a good start. Keep away from people who drive you away from the right things in life, from the path and everything, and hold to your friend. Now, I have friends all over the world who I've known for many, many years. I love them, and they're my companions. And the lucky thing, Peter Sanders is a very dear friend of mine. He's a great photographer, and hopefully he'll come one day. He's a lovely person. we talk at least 3 times a week on Skype. So, we have these tools now that we can keep in touch with our companions, people that we care about. And so I think that, you can do that. And what happens with companionship is this long-term, when you see people trying to do what we're all trying to do, it's hard. It's very, very difficult. We're going against the whole grain and the whole current of modern life, which is, it's totally the opposite of a spiritual life. And those of you who are trying to do this, when you see this, you start building so much respect for people. Look how hard it is, and look what they're doing. I told a story last night, and I'll repeat it. My friend Shams Friedlander took me to an Eid prayer at his dargah, in the Jarahi dargah in Istanbul. And there were about 700 people there. And it was beautiful, and it was packed with young people. And I was so happy, and I was raving about this. I said, Shams, this is amazing. Look how many people came. Look at, this is fantastic, and so on. He said, Haroon, there are 16 million people in Istanbul. This is it. And it's true. Only 16% of Turks pray. Only 16%, apparently, according to one statistic, of Saudis pray. This is where we are now. So if we're together, look at you. There's so many of you. Yeah, well, you're it, maybe. I don't know. And you should be happy about that. You're lucky. And we should be happy. And you should respect your companions here in this room, people who have taken the time out to come and talk about something other than the world, And now the second part, what was it? Just shout out what you were saying. Yeah. Well, that's a big question. I mean, first of all, people have asked me about, the thing of conversion. And one of the common threads in conversion is a confrontation in some way with death. That really wakes people up. Yusuf Islam, for example, had this encounter with death, which drove him eventually to Islam. And this is a very common thread. You hear this story all the time. I had something, and it's in the book. I had an encounter with death, which was of a different nature, but still it was the same. It was this recognition. So that's one thing. And in terms of what happens on the path, on a real path, one of the things that you see in people who've achieved something on the path is that they're incredibly humble. Incredibly humble. If you see someone who's calling themselves a sheikh and they're behaving as if they're a king, I'd walk the other way, frankly, because that's not what they're like. They're incredibly humble because they know they're nothing. They're nothing. They're zero. And that's great. And that's what's so great about being around these people, because you see what a human being is supposed to be like. Rasulullah was like that. He was so humble and beautiful. Did the Sahaba embrace Islam because of the Prophet was a great theologian? I don't think so. It was because of his incredible perfection and beauty of his character. He was so beautiful. He was so he was trustworthy. He was al-Amin. He was this beautiful character, and this is something tangible. You can see how this works. So there are, one of the things that I've noticed with people who've attained, they don't get angry. They don't get irritated. They have this incredible patience. It's not that they're showing it off or pretending to be. They just don't get it. So you don't even notice it for a while, and then one day you think, "Oh my God, I've been with him for like 5 years, and he's never gotten angry." How does that work? And then you start trying to imitate that, or emulate that, or aspire to that thing. So it's building beautiful qualities of character, desisting from things that make you, pollute the self and so on, and be, and just changing the way the heart is. And also, in terms of the path, it's not difficult. It's action. Deen al-mu'amala. The transaction with Allah is action. One of the great awliya that I was able to sit with, he said that the sickness of the human heart is, what shall I do? When you're not able to do, when you don't know what to do, you feel uneasy and troubled and everything. As soon as you find out what to do, everything's cool. And we know, we have a science of what to do. I was sitting with one of a really great Syrian sheikh, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Isa, and one of his people said, I can't sleep at night, I have insomnia. What do I do? He said, you get up and you do tahajjud prayers. He said, because shaitan hates it when you do the tahajjud prayers, and he's going to make you go to sleep. And he said, and if you don't go to sleep, you have the prayer. You have the reward. It's all action-oriented. It's not something you're lost in your head. You don't have to think your way out of something. You do your way out of something. Yeah.
Sorry, Sidi Harun, forgive me
go.
for cutting you off here. I just want to do justice to two questions that's been texted to me, and they may be from working people. Yeah, it's just two quick one. There is the saying, let go and let God. In this ultra-modern world, so many things are controlled and optimized for KPI and economic and monetary goals.
Yeah.
Can you share how do we balance tying the camel, but more importantly, trusting Allah? Sometimes it seems we believe in Allah, but don't trust Him. And very quickly, the second question. I'm a revert of 7 years now, alhamdulillah. My current struggle for the past 3 years is understanding Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. I do not see goodness in tests and calamities. My fear towards Allah is akin to punishment and not His mercy. Michael, your thoughts, please.
Okay. Could you reread the last thing? My fear is what?
My fear towards Allah is akin to punishment and not His mercy. That means he thinks of Allah in those terms. He's afraid of Allah more than thinking of Allah being merciful.
Well, I mean,
I suspect.
I don't know who's asking the question, but if I was face to face, I'd probably ask, what's the situation you're in, what experiences you've had. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different path, and a different orientation. So, as I said, I believe very deeply that Allah wants all of us to succeed, and but someone who's had a horrible background, let's say some of the refugees from Syria, what they've been through is unspeakable. I can't relate to it. I'll be honest. It's very, very horrible. I can't speak for them. I don't know how they are. They must see things much differently and have a much harder time. And it's very easy for me, who's been very lucky and never had to go through some of these kinds of trials and tribulations. It would be hard for me to, sit back and say, well, everything's going to be okay. I don't know. So in that, but on the other hand, Allah said, the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah is in the opinion of His slave. So have a good opinion of your Lord. So it's actually shifting your focus and look around. I was in England not too long ago, and there's a very interesting guy who I like very much, but he was saying, I just, I don't see anything good anymore. And I said, okay, look up right now. And we looked up, and it was this beautiful sky, beautiful trees. I said, look at that for a second. Look what we're surrounded with. Look at the world. Look at how beautiful the world is. Look, and all you have to do is look your neighbor next to you. Look how beautiful you are. You know, it's you know, you can focus on something dark and negative. Yes, and this is one of the problems. If you look at media now, at like video, these video series that are so popular, half of them are about people who are going to hell. Seriously. There was a American series that was very popular called Breaking Bad. This is the story of an ordinary man who was going to hell, and people are riveted by that. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. Why are you watching that? Why do you want to see something like that? But people are now lured into that because this is what the dominant culture, you know. So it's trying to look at the beauty of the creation. Look at that. I'm lucky. I live. My view is the sea. So I wake up in the morning. I see the sea. How can you not believe that Allah is beautiful?
SubhanAllah.
Yeah. And what was the first question?
Yeah, the first one was, I'm going to read the whole thing again. Let Go and Let God. I think there's a book, if I'm not wrong, on that topic in MK.
No.
In this ultra-modern world, so many things are controlled and optimized for KPI. Can you share how do we balance tying the camel, but more importantly, trusting Allah?
Yeah, by using phrases like KPI and all of that, it's obviously in the corporate world, and I've been there, and it's tough. It's very, very tough to deal with that world because it is diametrically opposed to a spiritual path. It's absolutely, the corporate world is totally opposed. It's all about profit. It's all about productivity, KPI, key performance indicators, all of that nonsense. And you can't get round it if you're in it. And so the way I would deal with that, or the way I did deal with it, because I ran a company for years, was that I would always do my wird, my dhikr. I'd go home and I'd do the dhikr, and I'd make sure that I prayed the prayers. One of the ancient shuyukh, Abul Abbas al-Mursi, he said, you know, the world is bad, basically. So if you have to be in the world, just make sure you do your prayers on time. So those are, you know, trying to create a measured, existence, and make your priority, your inward priority, the remembrance of Allah. And so what I recommend to people who are in the working world, in the workaday world, which is in Arabic, it can be translated as sabab, you know, the world of cause and effect, is to remember Allah, to constantly remember Allah. When you're driving to work, remember Allah. When you're waiting for a bus, remember Allah. When you're walking up the stairs, remember Allah. Remember God at all times and permeate your life with that until it sinks in the heart. And then you'll have a protection from that, you know. And trust me, I've been in that whole world, and it can be my son is an executive chef, and he's working for a big corporation in a big role in the corporation. And he was used to, you know, sort of being a fine dining chef, you know. He came into this corporation, and he almost had a heart attack, you know, from the pressure and the stress of being in that world, because it's a world that's fundamentally mediocre. The demands that are made of you in a corporate world have nothing to do with quality and everything to do with profit. It has nothing to do, you know, it's all systemic. This is inhuman. You know, this is a kind of an inhuman system that we're all engaged in, and you become a cog in that, you know, system. And this is just the way things are. And the cure for that is remembering Allah.
Okay. It's wonderful. So that is sounds like a simple cure, but it could be that simple.
It is that it doesn't mean that it's a panacea for everything. You will have struggles, and at a certain point, I remember sitting in management meetings. I remember I was in Jordan in a management meeting, and I was saying, Allah, please get me out of here. Please, get me out of here. It took years for me to get out of it, because I had children, and they were in school, and I needed to keep this thing going. But it's at a certain point, if you're on a path, then maybe you should try to find some other alternative if you can. But if you can't, don't feel bad about it, and don't feel but remember Allah. This is what we're asked to do, and give as much time as you can to that. And you can do it in between things. People don't think about that. They do the prayer, maybe if they're religious. Then they forget Allah the rest of the day. And they may have 30, 40 minutes empty, and they don't use them. So it's that thing. And what happens is that suddenly the heart starts beating to a different tune. And you start having, a different experience of life. And also, when you're in a corporate, I had a deputy who I really loved him. And he was a great guy, and he was excellent at his work. But he was like my son, and he had authority problems. He had, problems from his family and so on. And he used to be nasty sometimes, and sometimes he was right, but he was just it was Galil al-Adab, if you know what I mean by that. He just had bad manners, and he'd be and I'd come back, after he'd be very insulting, and I'd say, Allah, thank you for, beating me up, today with something. You have to sort of shift your focus and try to see that everything is from Allah. Everything. And remember Allah.
Alhamdulillah, thank you so much, Sidi Harun. I really wish we could sit here like the whole day and just listen to you, but we can't, because we've got to manage time. And thank you, Jazakumullah khair al-jazak. Can we also thank you warmly, please? Together, join me.